Welcome to EPG Pathshala of Informetrics. My name is Professor Asundi. I am a retired professor of Department of Library and Information Science of Bangalore University. Now I am working as a visiting faculty at the Documentation Research and Training Center at Indian Statistical Institute. Dear students, we are going to study the module on library use studies. The library use studies is very important in the sense that the use of the library materials or the reading materials helps in the collection development in the library. This module consists of an outline, the introduction, the objectives, and also some of the case studies, modules, and the measurement of the library use studies. Now let us follow one by one. The objectives of this module are to study the library use by the clientele of the library, to find out what are the different kinds of studies have been undertaken by the library scientists all over the world. The third one is what are the different kinds of modules that have been used in the study of the library use, and the third one, what are the kinds of measurements that have been applied for the library use. To start with any study, an important aspect of understanding the background of that particular subject is to conduct a comprehensive literature review. So in this module we have given an extensive literature review on the library use study, and one of the important study was conducted by Tobin using the library literature as the source for the period 1966 to 1973, for which the Tobin published the paper in 1976, and this is one of the basic source on the literature on library use studies. The fourth is on introduction. In the introduction to the topic, we would know the importance of user and the resources of the library, and in this context we will examine the quotation of Sayers, which emphasizes that the librarians, apart from the knowledge of theirs, should also know the wheres and should also know the people, in this context the user. User study deals with use of library, and that is our first discussion. The use of information is our second topic, and the use of e-resources in the current scenario as impacted by ICT, and there is a steady growth of e-resources, and there is also growing trend in their use due to the growth of consortia of e-resources such as UGC, InfoNet. In this part, we would examine some important studies on use studies. Some of the important studies in this context are listed, and highlights of these studies can be discussed. The first study is on Tobin. Tobin's study includes the study of the published literature on use study from 1960 to 1973. He has collected the references from the library literature, an indexing journal in library and information science. He has published this particular paper in 1976 and the reference to the paper is available at the end of this unit. The second study is by Morris B. Line. A series of library surveys were conducted in late 1960s by Dr. Line and still continue to conduct these studies. In the University of Bath, these studies are even today are announced or published. You can see the URL link to the University of Bath given at the end of this particular unit under the references. You can also see the URL given in this particular slide. The link given here shows the surveys of e-resources. The third study is by Dr. J.D. Bernal and Dr. Rolf Shaw, made in 1948 and 1958 respectively, in the two international conferences on scientific information held in London and Washington, again respectively in time. The fourth one is on the growth of e-resources, as already stated. In the context of enhanced use of e-resources, in the recent years, the Wikipedia has discussed on the decline of the library use, and again you can go to the URL link which gives you the complete details about the declining or the changes in the library use. Another very interesting study which emphasizes on the e-resources is by Van Dyke and McKenzie from the publisher point of view and also from the point of view of the librarians. The publishers are interested in the pattern of publishing the e-content, whereas the librarians are interested in the pricing of the e-content for the acquisition of the e-resources for their libraries. These studies, from the first one by Tobin to the Van Dyke, cover or give an overview of the changing context of use studies from print media to electronic media and the work of notable information scientists like Line, Bernal, Shaw, who pioneered a methodology of use and user studies. The library use studies in this particular module have been considered in three different environments, because the reading materials in the libraries have been changing in the form and the formats. For instance, in the ancient times we had clay tablets. After the Gutenberg, we entered into the print media. Later, in the 1970s, we entered into the information use, and after the 1990s or in the dawn of the 21st century, we entered into the digital era. So, the library use studies consist of three different environments: the physical environment, the information environment, and the digital or electronic environment. For each one of the environment, we understand what is the purpose of this particular study, the models, the matrices, the objectives, and some of the references in each one of them. Now, let us first study the physical environment. All of you know Dr. Ranganathan formulated 5 laws of library science. The first law states the books are for use. There is a very important philosophical move when Dr. Ranganathan formulated this particular rule or the law. Earlier we were considering books for preservation, but Dr. Ranganathan enunciated the first law, the books are for use, in which the libraries will come into picture as the very useful information sources for the users of the library. So, in the physical environment we study the purpose of the library materials in the print media, the models and the case studies in this particular aspect, and the measurements used in this particular aspect, the matrices, the models, and also number of studies are discussed, in which we are actually going to give you a description about the number of case studies. The first study is by Mukherjee. This is the unique study which was conducted by Mr. Mukherjee for a public library environment consisting of the public libraries in USA and UK. Now, one of the important aspect of this particular study is the per capita distribution of the books and the cost of the books involved, and this can be applied for the public libraries in our country. The second study is by Jusic study, which uses the evaluation of the circulation data for the purpose of the use of the library materials by the clientele. The third one is by Trueswell, which is considered as 80-20 study. After the physical environment, we are going to study the information used by the clientele in the library. From 1960 onwards, there was a shift from book to information. The information used was considered as not as the physical document, but the content of the document. At this particular point, we can recall two important contributions made by Dr. J.D. Bernal and Dr. Ralph Shaw, who in fact initiated the first use studies in the libraries. Dr. J.D. Bernal, Dr. Ralph Shaw, who presented their papers in 1948 and 1958 in the conferences of the Royal Societies at London and in Washington, made the pioneering contribution for the study of the information by the user. The second one is the citation pattern study, which are of recent origin, which was again initiated by Eugene Garfield of Institute of Scientific Information. It is on electronic environment. As already mentioned to you, we have moved from print to the information. Now we have moved to the electronic environment or the digital era. Nearly 60% of the information now is available in the born digital. In the fact, e-books, e-journals, e-thesis and many more e-resources are now available to the users in the libraries. As a result of this, the usage of the e-resources has increased tremendously in the last 1.5 decades. The libraries have entered into a consortia approach of accessing the e-resources on their desktops. The use of the electronic resources has been considered very important from the publisher's point of view to pricing the e-resources for the purchase of the libraries. As a result of which, there are two softwares have been developed by the publishers, namely the EBSCO. The two softwares are Counter and SUSHI. The electronic environment consists of the information aggregators, information consolidators, information providers and information vendors. As a result of the marketing of the e-resources to be very crucial and very important, the publishers, aggregators and the consolidators have developed these softwares, the counter and the SUSHI. In brief, I am going to describe you the counter. Counter means counting online usage of networked electronic resources. This particular software evaluates the use of the e-resources on the sites of the user, This is important from the point of view of the publishers as well as from the point of view of the management, because the management has invested an enormous amount of money on the purchase of e-resources, and they want to evaluate what is the extent of the use of the e-resources by their user in the libraries. So, the counter provides you a complete details of the use of the resources, use of the different kinds of resources like books, journals and e-thesis and so on and so forth, and it will come out with a kind of the entire statistics to be provided at the desktop of the individual organizations. So, the counter is one of the very important tool or the software tool that is available for the libraries to evaluate the use of the e-resources in their libraries. In fact, the counter was introduced in 2003, and in 2006 it covered a very large amount of the e-resources in the entire world. Counter uses a course of practice which helps in the standardization of the user studies in the entire e-resources. The counter usage statistics has been as well accepted mechanism adopted by the vendors who have compliance with the counter code of practices. Now, let us move to the next slide, which gives the description about the SUSHI. SUSHI stands for Standardized Usage Harvesting Initiative, is another tool to compile usage data online, and it is by the National Information Standards Organization of USA. SUSHI enables a library to gather their usage statistics across the multiple publisher platform without having to log into each search and compile usage statistics manually. These two, SUSHI and the counter, are considered to be very important software tools for study of the usage of the e-resources in the libraries. In summary, library use, user needs have been being conducted by the librarians since 1930s. The library use not only consists of the study of the e-resources, but also the print media as well as the information use. The library use studies are very important to evaluate how the collection is used in the library. As a result of this, number of studies across the country, across the world has been conducted, and the library use studies will be very important for the collection development in any library. At the end of this module, we have given quite a good number of references which are very useful for you to extend your knowledge on the library use studies. Thank you.